The Trump administration vowing to fight back against a lawsuit filed today by CNN. CNN is suing the president and other top officials for violating the First and Fifth Amendment after the White House revoked the press pass for our White House chief of staff, or rather, our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, last week. CNN has just asked a judge to force the White House to immediately restore Acosta's credentials. Let me just read for you a statement from CNN in part, quote, "While the suit is specific to CNN and Acosta, this could have happened to anyone. If left unchallenged, the actions of the White House would create a dangerous chilling effect for any journalist who covers our elected officials." So with me now, one of the lead attorneys retained by CNN, Ted Olson, is the former Solicitor General for former President George W. Bush, and also with me is CNN Chief Media Correspondent Brian Stelter. So gentlemen, good to see both of you. And Ted Olson, starting with you, sir, could you first just explain CNN's position here?
First of all, this is a very, very important case. As CNN said in that statement which you just read, this could happen to any journalist by any politician. We cannot, the First Amendment is one of the most important bulwarks of our liberty and our freedom. Presidents over history have complained about it, but most of the presidents at the end of the day have realized the First Amendment is absolutely necessary. It is the public's window into what public officials are doing. Journalists cannot be silenced, censored, or intimidated, and that's the end of the line. The White House cannot get away with this.
Ted, CNN did ask the White House for some sort of explanation. What did we get?
Well, we first of all got an explanation about there was some physical contact between the reporter, Jim Acosta, and the intern who was dealing with the microphone. They backed away from that because it wasn't justified by anybody who watched the tape. Then the president said, well, we can't have people in this room who don't respect the president or respect the presidency. The First Amendment requires robust, aggressive reporting. Reporters must be free to ask tough questions and to be persistent about it, and they don't bow down or take an oath before they walk into that White House press room. They have to be independent, free, and aggressive.
Brian, I'm coming to you in a second, but Ted, one more on back in 1977. There was already precedent on this in a decision from 1977 from the U.S. Court of Appeals. What was ruled then?
Well, the court ruled then that if someone was going to attempt to interfere with or take away the press credentials of someone covering the White House, there had to be an explanation, there had to be objective procedures, there had to be a fair process and an opportunity to be heard. None of that applies here. And the reason that that is so important is that if that process doesn't exist, a president or anybody working for a president or other public official can discriminate against any reporter on the basis of that reporter's viewpoint or simply because the president doesn't like that reporter. And there's plenty of evidence that President Trump does not like that reporter or the organization, CNN, for whom he works. And we cannot allow public officials to discriminate on the basis of their personal prejudice or feelings towards a reporter. Freedom must be free. The First Amendment must stand for something, and it must stand for the fact that we have situations all over the world where reporters are being beaten, jailed, intimidated, and in fact murdered. We can't allow that step to be crossed here.
Yes. Brian, what is the White House saying?
I think the White House is trying to divert attention from the actual claims in this case, the actual claims in the lawsuit, and instead they are basically just complaining about Jim Acosta. Sarah Sanders, who is one of the 6 defendants in the suit, has issued a statement where she says Acosta was unprofessional, was rude at that presidential news conference last week. So that is the official rationale for taking away his press pass. Here's a part of the statement, Brooke, from Sanders. She says, the First Amendment is not served when a single reporter out of more than 150 attempts to monopolize the floor. If there is no check on this type of behavior, it impedes the ability of the president, the White House staff, and members of the media to conduct business. So that's her claim, but of course, lots of reporters ask follow-up questions. That happens all the time. To borrow a line from the Washington Post's Eric Wemple, it's as if Sanders is trying to say, hey, we want to make sure lots of people can ask lots of questions. but this is coming from a press secretary who has stopped holding daily briefings. So the hypocrisy is pretty strong here. But as Ted was saying, ultimately this is about the legal precedent and the processes that weren't followed. The Code of Federal Regulations is pretty specific. We can put part of it on screen. It essentially says, again, dating back to the 1970s, the only guidelines, the only the factor that's going to be considered for denying a request for a press pass, for a hard pass, is going to be whether the person is a physical danger to the president. And obviously Jim Acosta, and like every other reporter there, Acosta's not a physical threat to the president. No White House reporter is. And so that guideline, that Code of Federal Regulations, was not followed in this case.
Ted, going back to Brian reporting out the White House's response, he read part of Sarah Sanders' statement. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it doesn't stand up. If the White House has to have rules with respect to those press conferences, it should adopt rules and let everybody know what those rules are. Everyone knows that's a pretty robust and exciting environment. It is allowed to be that way. Why is Jim Acosta being picked out? Because the president has said again and again he does not like Acosta. He does not like Acosta's reporting. That's more important than anything. We can't have a president acting like dictators do all over the world to silence reporters that they don't like, or reporters who say things or dig too deeply or expose the president too much. The president wants to silence people like that. He cannot do that under the First Amendment.